When a 10-year-old boy standing in the insulation aisle of a hardware store in Summersville, West Virginia looked up at the man next to him and said, "Which one keeps you warmest?" "I need the one that keeps you warmest because it gets really cold at night and I only have one blanket." The man didn't think much of it at first. Kids ask weird questions. Then the boy said, "It's for where I sleep. I sleep in the shed behind the house. I've been sleeping there since September. It's November now, and last night I could see my breath, and I don't want to be cold anymore, so I'm trying to fix it myself." And the man, a 250-pound biker who'd been building houses for 23 years, stood in that aisle and felt something shift inside his chest that would not shift back. Not a guest house, not a converted garage, a shed, a storage shed behind a house. And the boy said it the way you'd describe your bedroom, casually, factually, like sleeping in a shed was just where he lived, and the only problem worth solving was the cold. Burke and Son Hardware sat on Main Street in Summersville, the kind of independently owned hardware store that smelled like sawdust and pipe-fitting compound and had been there so long the floor creaked in the same spots it creaked in 1987. It wasn't a big store. 6 aisles, a back room with plumbing supplies, a counter with a register, and a jar of free suckers. The kind of place where the owner knew your name and your project and how many trips you'd already made that week. Mace Dillon was in the insulation aisle because he was wrapping a crawl space on a flip house in Craigsville. He was 46 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, 250 pounds, with a dark blonde beard and arms that had been swinging hammers and carrying bundles of shingles since he was 23. He ran Dillon Contracting, a 3-man crew that did renovations, additions, and flips across Nicholas and Webster counties. He also rode as treasurer for the Golly MC, a 12-member club based out of Summersville that met every other Saturday at the fire hall on Broad Street. Subscribe to Asphalt Angels and hit that notification bell. Because this story starts with a boy in a hardware store asking about insulation and ends with a shed that should never have had a child inside it. Mace was comparing R13 and R19 bats when the boy appeared at the end of the aisle. Small, the kind of small that might be age or might be something else. Dark hair, a jacket that was too thin for November, jeans with mud on the knees. He was looking at the insulation rolls the way Mace looked at insulation rolls, studying the labels, reading the R values, comparing prices, not browsing, shopping. The boy pulled a roll of R13 fiberglass off the shelf. It was almost as big as he was. He struggled with it, got it onto the floor, then sat on it and looked at the label like he was doing math in his head. "That's for walls," Mace said, not thinking about it, just talking the way you talk to someone in a hardware aisle. "If you're doing a ceiling or floor, you want the R19, more thermal resistance." The boy looked up. "What's thermal resistance?" "Means it keeps more heat in, or cold out, depending on which side you're on." "Which one keeps you warmest?" Mace almost laughed. Kid sounded like a homeowner. "Depends on the space. What's it for?" "It's for where I sleep." "Your bedroom?" "No, the shed. I sleep in the shed behind the house. I've been sleeping there since September. It's November now, and last night I could see my breath, and I don't want to be cold anymore, so I'm trying to fix it myself." Mace set down the bat he was holding. "You sleep in a shed?" "It's got a door and a roof. It's not the worst place I've slept, but it's cold. The walls are just plywood. The wind comes through the cracks. I put cardboard up, but it didn't help. My mom's boyfriend said I could use the shed, or I could leave. Those were my options, so I took the shed." "Where's your mom in this?" "Inside. She's inside the house, in her room. She's—" The boy paused, chose his words. "She doesn't come out much. She used to, before Tony moved in. Now she stays in her room, and Tony runs the house, and Tony doesn't want me in the house. Why not? Because I'm not his kid. He's got his own kid. A girl, she's 7. Her name is Brooklyn. Brooklyn has a room. Brooklyn eats at the table. Brooklyn sits on the couch and watches TV. I'm not allowed to do any of that. Tony said, I take up space and cost money, and he's not paying for someone else's kid. So he put me in the shed. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Asphalt Angels, because a 10-year-old boy was living in a shed behind a house where his own mother slept inside, and he was in a hardware store trying to buy insulation because nobody else was going to help him. What's your name, buddy? Colby Webb. How old are you? 10. I'll be 11 in January. Colby, how are you paying for insulation? The boy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plastic bag with cash in it, 1s and 5s, crumpled, held together with a rubber band. I've been collecting cans since September. There's a recycling drop-off behind the Food Lion. I've been walking there after school with bags of cans I find on the road. I've got $31. Mace looked at the money. $31 in 1s and 5s from collecting aluminum cans on the side of the road for 2 months. A 10-year-old boy collecting trash to insulate a shed because the adults who were supposed to take care of him had put him outside like a dog. Colby, does your school know about this? I go to school every day, Summersville Elementary. I get there early because the gym opens at 7:15 and it's warm and they have breakfast. I eat breakfast there. That's my main meal. Tony doesn't let me eat at the house. Sometimes my mom sneaks food into the shed when Tony's not there, a sandwich or crackers or whatever she can grab. But that's maybe twice a week. So you eat once a day. Breakfast at school on weekdays. On weekends I don't eat unless my mom sneaks something out. Last Saturday I didn't eat at all. Sunday she brought me a peanut butter sandwich at 3 a.m. She waited until Tony was asleep. She was crying when she brought it. If you're watching this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes 1 second, and helps these stories reach the people who need them. Now, back to the story. Mace took out his phone. He wasn't going to stand in a hardware store and listen to a child describe hunger without doing something about it. But first, he needed more. The shed. Tell me about it. It's maybe 8 feet by 10, plywood walls, metal roof. Tony uses it for lawnmower storage and tools. He moved the mower to the side and put a mattress on the floor. Not a real mattress, one of those camping pads. 1 blanket. There's no electricity, no heat, no light except a flashlight I found in the shed. There's a padlock on the outside, but Tony doesn't lock it anymore because he says I'm free to leave whenever I want. He means leave, like go away forever. Is there a bathroom? There's a house about 10 feet away with a perfectly good bathroom and a kitchen and a couch and heat and my own room that used to be my room. Tony turned it into Brooklyn's playroom. I use the bathroom at the gas station on Route 19 if I need to during the day. At night, I hold it or I go outside, in the dark, in November. That last part, in the dark, in November, the boy said it like he was listing facts, but his voice cracked on the word November. The first crack Mace had heard. Everything else had been delivered flat, practiced, the tone of a kid who'd rehearsed his own situation in his head so many times it had become a script. But November cracked him. Because September was survivable, and October was hard, but November in West Virginia in a plywood shed with no heat and 1 blanket and a camping pad on a concrete floor, November was the line. Mace dialed 911. I'm at Burke and Son Hardware on Main Street in Summersville. I've got a 10-year-old boy named Colby Webb who's been living in a shed behind his house for 2 months with no heat, no electricity, and minimal food. He's here right now trying to buy insulation with money he earned collecting cans. I need officers, and I need CPS at this location. The boy is safe with me. Is the child in immediate danger? He slept outside last night in November with one blanket. Yeah, he's in danger. He texted the Golly MC group chat. Hardware store now, 10-year-old kid living in a shed. Bring food and a jacket, not a drill. Then he bought the insulation. Both rolls. The R13 and the R19. Not for the shed, for the flip house that suddenly didn't matter as much as it had 20 minutes ago. Why'd you buy both? Colby asked. Because I build houses for a living, and I just realized the most important thing I'm going to build this month isn't a house. Colby looked at him like he didn't understand. He would, later. If Asphalt Angels has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below. Now, back to the ending. While they waited for the police, Mace sat with Colby on the bench outside the hardware store. Two Golly MC brothers showed up, Pruitt with a bag of food from the Dairy Queen across the street, and Holden with a Carhartt jacket from his truck that was 4 sizes too big for the boy, but warm. Colby put the jacket on without being asked and sank into it like it was the first warm thing he'd felt in weeks. Because it was. Colby ate a cheeseburger and fries on the bench outside Burke and Son Hardware, and he ate them methodically. The same careful, rationing bites that Mace had seen before in people who didn't know when the next meal was coming. Between bites, Colby looked at the road like he was calculating whether Tony would drive past and see him. He doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't care where I am during the day. He only cares that I'm not in the house. And your mom? My mom's scared of him. She's not a bad mom. She used to be a really good mom. Before Tony, she used to read to me every night. She used to make pancakes on Saturday. She used to hold my hand in the parking lot even when I said I was too old for it. Then Tony moved in, and she got smaller. That's the only way I can describe it. She got smaller. A Nicholas County deputy arrived, followed by a CPS caseworker named Walt Hager, a tall, quiet man who'd been doing family services for 9 years. They listened to Colby tell the story again. Same flat delivery, same careful words, same crack on the word November. Walt went to the house. He came back 45 minutes later and pulled the deputy aside. Mace was close enough to hear. The shed is exactly what the boy described. Camping pad on the floor, 1 blanket, no heat, no electricity. There's a flashlight and some empty cracker wrappers and a stack of library books. The kid's been reading library books in a shed by flashlight. Tony Briggs is inside the residence. He states the boy chose to live in the shed voluntarily and that the boy has behavioral problems. The mother, Hannah Webb, is in the back bedroom. She's not doing well. She corroborated the boy's account. She says Tony moved the boy out in September and she's been trying to get him back inside, but Tony controls the house. She could leave, the deputy said. She could, but she hasn't. The caseworker can explain that better than I can. The deputy looked at Walt. Walt looked at the ground. 9 years of family services, and he still didn't have a clean sentence for why a mother stays in a house while her son sleeps in a shed 10 feet from the back door. The reasons are real, and they're complicated, and they don't make it okay, but they make it understandable if you've seen enough of it. Walt had seen enough of it. Tony Briggs, 34, was arrested that afternoon. Charges included child neglect, child endangerment, and contributing to the conditions of a minor. He stood on the front porch in handcuffs and looked at the deputy and said, "It's a shed, not a cage. The kid had a roof over his head. I didn't have to do anything for him. He's not mine." The deputy didn't respond. Some statements are their own conviction. Brooklyn, Tony's 7-year-old daughter, stood at the living room window and watched her father get put in the cruiser. She didn't cry. She just watched. Mace wondered what that house had been like from her side, the side with the room and the table and the TV. Whether she knew the boy in the shed was being treated differently, or whether the arrangement had been normalized so completely that she thought every family had someone who slept outside. Kids accept what they see. That's the danger. Hannah Webb was not arrested. She was referred to services, the kind of services that address what makes a mother get smaller. She stood on the porch and watched Tony get put in the cruiser, and she didn't cry. She turned around and walked to the shed, and she opened the door, and she stood in the doorway and looked at the camping pad and the one blanket and the flashlight and the stack of library books, and she put her hand on the door frame and her knees buckled, and she sat down in the doorway of the shed where her son had slept for 2 months, and she said, I knew every night. I brought him sandwiches at 3 a.m., and I told myself that was enough. It wasn't enough. Colby's grandmother, Hannah's mother, Ruth Webb, 64, drove from Richwood to pick him up, 30-minute drive. She made it in 22. She was a retired school librarian who drove a green Subaru Outback and had the kind of face that said she'd been worrying about this exact scenario for longer than 2 months. She got out of the car, and Colby was sitting on the bench outside the hardware store, wearing a Carhartt jacket that went to his knees. Grandma, get in the car, baby. I have to give this jacket back. Holden, the biker who'd brought it, shook his head. It's yours, kid. Colby looked at the jacket, at Holden, at Mace, at the bench where he'd eaten his first full meal in days. I don't know how to take things from people. I'm used to figuring it out myself. That's the problem, Ruth said, kneeling in front of him. You're 10. You shouldn't have to figure anything out by yourself. That's what adults are for. That's what I'm for. Now get in the car. We're going home, and I'm making you dinner, and you're sleeping in a bed tonight. A real bed. With heat, and a roof that isn't metal, and as many blankets as you want. Can I bring my books? Baby, we'll go to the library every single week. Colby got in the Subaru. Ruth buckled him in even though he was 10, because she needed to do something for him, and a seatbelt was the first thing available. She closed the door, walked to Mace. How long? 2 months, since September. And nobody noticed? The school? The neighbors? He showed up every day, clean clothes. He was washing them himself, she said. Ate breakfast at school, got there early, never missed a day. He was invisible because he was functioning. Nobody looks at the kid who's holding it together. Ruth closed her eyes. That's my daughter in that house. That's my daughter who let a man put her son in a shed. I raised her better than that. She's not well, ma'am. The caseworker, I know she's not well. I've known for a year. I tried. She wouldn't let me in. He wouldn't let me in. I should have tried harder. You're here now. Yeah. She looked at the car, at Colby in the back seat, swimming in a Carhartt jacket, looking out the window at the hardware store where he'd gone to buy insulation with $31 in cans. Yeah, I'm here now. She shook Mace's hand. Then she shook Pruitt's and Holden's. Then she walked back to the car and got in, and Colby said something from the back seat that Mace couldn't hear, but Ruth put her head on the steering wheel for about 10 seconds before she started the engine. Later, Colby told Mace what he'd said. He'd said, Grandma, can we stop at Food Lion? I want to return my cans money. I don't need it anymore. $31. 2 months of walking the roadside in September and October, collecting aluminum. He wanted to return it because someone had finally made the cold stop and the money didn't have a purpose anymore. Mace went home that night and sat in his truck in the driveway for a long time because a boy who wants to return $31 in can money the moment someone helps him is either the most generous kid alive or the most used to having nothing that he doesn't know how to keep something. Or both. The Golly MC started a program called Warm Enough, named for the question Colby tried to answer with $31 and a roll of R13 fiberglass. The program partnered with schools across Nicholas County to identify kids who arrived early every day, not because they were eager, but because school was warmer than home. The program provided winter supplies, food boxes, and home wellness checks for families flagged by the early arrival pattern. The card read, "The kid who shows up first might need the most." Mace hung a piece of R13 fiberglass on the wall of his shop, just a small square framed behind the desk where clients signed contracts. People asked about it sometimes. He told them the story. Not all of it, just enough. A boy in a hardware store, insulation aisle, $31 in cans. The part where a kid who slept in a shed knew more about thermal resistance than most homeowners. 6 months later, Colby was living with Ruth in Richwood. He had his own room, small, with bookshelves Ruth built from a kit, and a reading lamp on the nightstand, and 3 blankets on the bed even in spring, because Colby wanted 3 blankets, and Ruth wasn't going to argue about blankets. Not ever. He still went to the library every week. He read everything: adventure books, science books, history, biographies. Ruth said he averaged 4 books a week. The librarian in Richwood knew him by name within 2 weeks. "You read fast," the librarian told him. "I had a lot of practice. I used to read every night by flashlight." Camping? Colby looked at her. Something like that. He visited Mace's job sites on school breaks when Ruth drove through Summersville. Mace let him hold the tape measure, mark studs, watch the crew frame walls. Colby asked about everything: why the studs were 16 inches apart, why the vapor barrier went on the warm side, why R19 was better than R13 in an attic. He remembered specs the way other kids remembered batting averages. He could recite insulation R values from memory: R13 for 2 by 4 walls, R19 for 2 by 6, R30 for floors, R49 for attics. Mace's crew started calling him the inspector because he'd walk through a job site and point out gaps in the vapor barrier before Mace noticed them. "You're going to put me out of business," Mace told him. "I just don't want anything to be cold," Colby said, and he meant more than the walls. "You remember that from the store?" Mace asked once, after Colby corrected a supplier who'd sent R13 instead of R19 for a cathedral ceiling. "I remember everything from that store. That's where it stopped being cold." One afternoon on a job site, Mace found Colby sitting inside a framed closet, just the studs, no drywall yet, with a book. He'd made himself a little space between the studs and was reading. "What are you doing in there?" "It's small, but it's warm, and the door's open." Mace realized the boy was sitting in a space the size of a shed, but this one had no lock, no November wind, and a man 20 feet away who knew he was there. That was the difference, not the size, the knowing. Hannah was in a program. She was doing the work, slowly, painfully, the way you rebuild when the foundation is cracked and you can't just patch it. She called Colby every Sunday. The calls were careful at first, formal, the way you talk to someone you love but let down so badly you don't know where the words go anymore. One Sunday, she said, "I should have fought harder for you." Colby said, "You brought me sandwiches at 3 a.m. You were fighting. You were just fighting quiet." Hannah cried. Colby didn't. He'd stopped crying about it sometime in October, when the nights got cold enough that crying made his face wet and the wind made the wet worse. He'd decided to stop, and he'd stopped. Ruth said the therapist was working on that, on teaching Colby that stopping was surviving, but feeling was living, and he deserved both. Be the one who hears insulation and hears something else. Thank you for watching this story. If it reminded you that a child standing in a hardware store asking about our values might not be doing a school project, they might be trying to survive, please share it. Subscribe to Asphalt Angels for more stories, proving that the smallest question in the wrong aisle can change a life. Tell us in the comments, have you ever looked at a kid and realized they were holding it all together alone?